1986, a new leader comes to power in the Kremlin, a reformer, Mikhail Gorbachev. Premier Gorbachev believes Afghanistan is a bleeding wound, that if reforms are to take hold in the Soviet Union, the bleeding will have to stop. Early on, Gorbachev concludes the Soviets must withdraw from Afghanistan.
In September of 1987, Edward Shevardnadze met with his counterpart, Secretary of State George Shultz, in Washington, and he asked for a private session, dismissed all their aides, and he looked Shultz in the eye. They had a very good relationship by this point, and he said, "We are really going to leave Afghanistan."
But in Washington, the hardliners in President Reagan's administration don't see it.
Shultz recounts that he understood that Shevardnadze meant what he said, and he was stunned that the Soviets were really going to reverse such a bedrock policy. But he was afraid to tell his own colleagues in the Reagan administration, he writes, because he was afraid that they would accuse him of being soft-minded, soft on the Soviets, not realistic enough.
But it is all true. In fact, the Soviets are rushing to get ready for the pullout.
We saw them in the distance. They came across in their armored personnel carriers, and the last one in line was the one carrying the last Soviet military commander, General Gromov. He stopped about 200 yards from this side of the bridge where we were on the Uzbek side, and he got out and he walked the final 200 yards, and this was a very dramatic moment. He was the last Soviet military commander after 10 years of the Soviet occupation and all the fighting and destruction that had gone on.
Victory in one war has sown the seeds for another. The tools of the Soviet war are waiting for the Taliban to take them up. And the United States continues to pour fuel on the fire. The last Soviet troops leave Afghanistan in February 1989, nearly a decade after they arrived. The Afghan Mujahideen, a broad coalition of tribal warlords from around Afghanistan, defeats the army of one of the world's two superpowers. It is a victory for the United States as well, which has waged a covert CIA war against the Soviets.
The overriding objective of the United States, of course, was to eject the Soviets from Afghanistan and then ultimately to neutralize the effect of the Soviet client state government that they'd left there under a man named Najibullah.
The Soviets left behind, as their troops withdrew, a weak communist proxy government, still at war with its own people. And that war persisted for 3 more years.
More trouble is ahead.
While the Soviet military was in Afghanistan, there was every reason for the United States to continue supporting the Pakistani approach of providing the extremists with the great bulk of American weaponry. However, after the Soviet army pulled out in February of 1989, we should have readjusted our policy and provided weapons to all groups, not only the extremists, but the moderates and others in Afghanistan.